Chapter 6 of Mary Louise Solves a Mystery by L. Frank Baum. read.LibriVox.org into the public domain. Flitting. Once more they moved suddenly, and the second flitting came about in this way. Alora stood beside the easel one morning, watching her father work on his picture. Not that she was especially interested in him or the picture, but there was nothing else for her to do. She stood with her slim legs apart, her hands clasped behind her, staring rather vacantly, when he looked up and noted her presence. "Well, what do you think of it?" he asked rather sharply. "Of the picture?" said Laurie. "Of course." "I don't like it," she asserted with childish frankness. "Eh? You don't like it? Why not, girl?" "Well," she replied, her eyes narrowing critically, "that cow's horn isn't on straight, the red cow's left horn, and it's the same size all the way up." He laid down his palette and brush and gazed at his picture for a long time. The scowl came on his face again. Usually his face was stolid and expressionless, but Alora had begun to observe that whenever anything irritated or disturbed him he scowled, and the measure of the scowl indicated to what extent he was annoyed. When he scowled at his own unfinished picture, Laurie decided he was honest enough to agree with her criticism of it. Finally the artist took a clasp knife from his pocket, opened the blade and deliberately slashed the picture from top to bottom, this way and that, until it was a mere mass of shreds. Then he kicked the stretcher into a corner, and brought out another picture, which he placed on the easel. "Well, how about that?" he asked, looking hard at it himself. Alora was somewhat frightened at having caused the destruction of the cow picture. She hesitated before replying, I'd rather not say." "How funny," he said musingly, "but until now I never realized how stiff and unreal the daub is. Shall I finish it, Alora?" "I think so, sir," she answered. Again the knife slashed through the canvas, and the remains joined the scrap heap in the corner. Jason Jones was not scowling any more. Instead, there was a hint of a humorous expression on his usually dull features. Only pausing to light his pipe, he brought out one after another of his canvases, and after a critical look destroyed each and every one. Laurie was perplexed at the mad act, for although her judgment told her they were not worth keeping, she realized that her father must have passed many laborious hours on them. But now that it had dawned on him how utterly unartistic his work was, in humiliation and disgust he had wiped it out of existence. With this thought in mind, the girl was honestly sorry for him. But Jason Jones did not seem sorry. When the last ruined canvas had been contemptuously flung into the corner, he turned to the child and said to her in a voice so cheerful that it positively startled her: "Get your hat and let's take a walk. An artist's studio is no place for us, Laurie. Doesn't it seem deadly dull in here? And outside, the sun is shining." The rest of the day he behaved much like a human being. He took the girl to the park to see the zoo, and bought her popcorn and peanuts, a wild extravagance for him. Later in the day they went to a picture show, and finally entered a downtown restaurant, quite different from and altogether better than the one where they had always before eaten, and enjoyed a really good dinner. When they left the restaurant he was still in the restless and reckless mood that had dominated him, and said: "Suppose we go to a theater? Won't you like that better than you would returning to our poky rooms?" "Yes, indeed," responded Alora. They had seats in the gallery, but could see very well. Just before the curtain rose Alora noticed a party being seated in one of the boxes. The lady nearest the rail, dressed in an elaborate evening gown, was Janet Orme. There was another lady with her, conspicuous for blonde hair and much jewelry, and the two gentlemen who accompanied them kept in the background, as if not too proud of their company. Alora glanced at her father's face and saw the scowl there, for he too had noted the box party. But neither of the two made any remark, and soon the child was fully absorbed in the play. As they left the theater, Janet's party was entering an automobile, laughing and chatting gaily. Both father and daughter silently watched them depart, and then they took a street car and went home. "Go to bed, girl," said Jason Jones, when they had mounted the stairs. "I'll smoke another pipe, I guess." When she came out of her room next morning she heard her father stirring in the studio. She went to him, and was surprised to find him packing his trunk, which he had drawn into the middle of the room. "Now that you're up," he said in quite a cheerful tone, "we'll go to breakfast, and then I'll help you pack your own duds. Only one trunk, though, girl, for the other must go into storage, and you may see it again some time, and you may not." "Are we going away?" she inquired, hoping it might be true. "We are. We're going a long way, my girl. Do you care?" "Of course," said she, amazed at the question, for he had never considered her in the least. "I'm glad. I don't like your studio." He laughed, and the laugh shocked her. She could not remember ever to have heard Jason Jones laugh before. "I don't like the place either, girl, and that's why I'm leaving it. For good, this time. I was a fool to return here. In trying to economize, I proved extravagant." Alora did not reply to that. She was eager to begin packing and hurried through her breakfast. All the things she might need on a journey she put into one trunk. She was not quite sure what she ought to take, and her father was still more ignorant concerning a little girl's wardrobe, but finally both trunks were packed and locked, and then Mr. Jones called a wagon and carted away the extra trunk of Alora's and several boxes of his own to be deposited in a storage warehouse. She sat in the bare studio and waited for his return. The monotony of the past weeks, which had grown oppressive, was about to end, and for this she was very grateful. From a life of luxury the child had been dumped into a gloomy studio in the heart of a big, bustling city that was all unknown to her and where she had not a single friend or acquaintance. Her only companion had been a strange man who happened to be her father, but displayed no affection for her, no spark of interest in her happiness or even comforts. For the first time in her life she lacked a maid to dress her and keep her clothes in order. There was no one to attend to her education, no one to amuse her, no one with whom to counsel in any difficulty. She had been somewhat afraid of her peculiar father, and her natural reserve, derived from her mother, had deepened in his society. Yesterday and this morning he had seemed more human, more companionable, yet Alora felt that it was due to a selfish elation and recognized a gulf between them that might never be bridged. Her father differed utterly from her mother in breeding, in intelligence, in sympathy. He was not of the same world, even the child could realize that. And yet he was her father, all she had left to depend upon, to cling to. She wondered if he really possessed the good qualities her mother had attributed to him. If so, when she knew him better, she might learn to like him. He was gone a long time, it seemed, but as soon as he returned the remaining baggage was loaded on the wagon and sent away, and then they left the flat and boarded a streetcar for downtown. On Lower Broadway Mr. Jones entered a bank and seemed to transact considerable business. Laurie saw him receive several papers and a lot of money. Then they went to a steamship office nearby, where her father purchased tickets. Afterward they had lunch, and Jason Jones was still in high spirits, and seemed more eager and excited than Alora had ever before known him. "We're going across the big water, to Europe," he told her at luncheon, "so if there is anything you positively need for the trip, tell me what it is and I'll buy it. No frivolities, though," qualifying his generosity, "but just stern necessities. And you must think quick, for our boat leaves at 4 o'clock, and we've no time to waste." But Alora shook her head. Once she had been taken by her mother to London, Paris and Rome, but all her wants had been attended to, and it was so long ago, 4 or 5 years, that the voyage was now but a dim remembrance. No one noticed them when they went aboard. There was no one to see them off or to wish them bon voyage. It saddened the child to hear the fervent good-byes of others, for it emphasized her own loneliness. Yes, quite friendless was little Alora. She was going to a foreign land with no companion but a strange and uncongenial man whom fate had imposed upon her in the guise of a parent. As they steamed out to sea, and Alora sat on deck and watched the receding shores of America, she turned to her father with the first question she had ventured to ask. "Where are we going? To London?" "Not now," he replied. "This ship is bound for the port of Naples. I didn't pick Naples, you know, but took the first ship sailing today. Having made up my mind to travel, I couldn't wait," he added with a chuckle of glee. "You're not particular as to where we go, are you?" "No," said Alora. "That's lucky," he rejoined, "for it wouldn't have made any difference anyhow." End of Chapter 6. Read by Sabella Denton. For more free audiobooks or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Mary Louise Solves a Mystery by L. Frank Baum. Read for LibriVox.org into the public domain. Mary Louise intrudes. It was 4 years later, when, on a sunny afternoon in April, a carriage broke down on the Amalfi Road, between Positano and Sorrento in Italy. A wheel crumpled up, and the driver stopped his horses and explained to his passengers, in a jumble of mixed Italian and English, that he could go no farther. The passengers, an old gentleman of distinguished appearance, and a young girl as fresh and lovely as a breath of spring, clambered out of the rickety vehicle and after examining the wheel, admitted that their driver spoke truly. On one side the road was a steep descent to the sea; opposite, the hillside was masked by a trellis thick with grapevines. The road curved around the mountain, so there was no other vista. "Here's a nice fix, Grandpa Jim!" exclaimed the girl with an amused laugh. "Where are we, and what's going to become of us?" "That is somewhat of a complicated problem, Mary Louise, and I can't guess it offhand, without due reflection," replied Gran'pa Jim, whom others called Colonel Hathaway. "I imagine, however, that we are about 3 miles from Positano and 5 or 6 from Sorrento, and it's a stiff walk, for old legs or young, in either direction. Besides, there's our luggage, which I am loath to abandon and disinclined to carry." The driver interposed. "Give me the moment, Signore, perhaps the hour, and I return to Positano for more carriage wheel. Some other. My cousin Luigi, he live in Positano, and Luigi have a many carriage wheel in his shed. I sure, Signore, I get the wheel." "That is a sensible idea," said the old gentleman. "Make haste, my man, and we will wait here." The driver unhitched his horses from the vehicle, and after strapping a blanket on one of them for a saddle, mounted it and departed. "I take the 2 horse," he explained, "for one to ride me and one for to ride the wheel." They watched him amble away down the road, and Mary Louise shook her head and remarked: "He will never make it in an hour, at that rate, Gran'pa Jim, and in 2 hours the sun will have set, and it will be dinner time. Already I feel the pangs of hunger." "Those who travel in Italy," said her grandfather, "should be prepared to accept any happening in a spirit of resignation. A moment or two we were jogging merrily along toward a good hotel and a savory dinner, but now " "This entire carriage seems ready to fall apart," declared the girl, standing in the road and viewing the ancient vehicle critically, "so it's a wonder something didn't break sooner. Now if we could get to the other side of that trellis, Gran'pa Jim, we might find a shady spot to rest while our charioteer is searching for a new wheel." "There must be a gate somewhere about," he answered, eyeing the vine-clad barrier. "Come, Mary Louise, let us investigate." 100 yards down the road they came to some rude stone steps and a wicket. The old gentleman lifted the wooden latch and found the gate unlocked. Followed by Mary Louise, he entered the vineyard and discovered a narrow, well-beaten path leading up the hillside. "Perhaps there is a house near by," said the girl. "Shall we go on, Gran'pa Jim?" "Why not, my dear? These Italians are hospitable folk and we may get a cake and a cup of goat's milk to stay our appetite." So they climbed the hill, following the little path, and presently came upon a laborer who was very deliberately but methodically cultivating the vines with a V-shaped hoe. Seeing the strangers, the man straightened up, and leaning upon his hoe, eyed them with evident suspicion. "Good afternoon," said the old gentleman in Italian, one of the few phrases in the language he had mastered. "Oh, I speak the English, Signore," replied the man, doffing his hat. "I am Silvio Allegheri, you must know, and I live in America some time." "Why, this is like meeting an old friend!" exclaimed Mary Louise, winning the fellow instantly with her smile. "But why did you leave America, Silvio?" "Because I have make my fortune there," was the solemn reply. "It is easy to make the fortune in America, Signorina. I am chef in the restaurant in Sandusky. You know Sandusky? Most excellent. In a few years I save much money, then I return here and purchase an estate. My estate is 3 miles across the hill yonder, and there is a road to it which is not much used. However, it is a fine estate, and I am rented to my cousin for 500 lire a year. Such good business habit I learn in America." "Why don't you live on your estate yourself?" inquired the girl. "It is not yet the time," answered the man, with a shake of his head. "I am but 52 years alive, and while I am still so young I shall work for others, and save the money my estate brings me. When I get old and can no longer work for the others, then I will go to my estate and be happy." "Very sensible," commended the old gentleman. "And whom do you work for now?" "The student Americano, Signora, the one who has rented this valuable estate. I am the Signora student's valet, his gardener, and at times his chef. I grease his automobile, which is a very small chug-chug, but respectable, and I clean his shoes, when I can catch him with them off. I am valuable to him, and for 3 years he has paid me fair wages." "Is this a big estate?" asked Mary Louise. "Enormous, Signorina. It comprises 3 acres." "And where is the house?" "Just over the hill yonder, Signora." "Does the student Americano live there all alone?" "With his daughter, who is the Signorina Alora." "Oh, there is a daughter, then. And you say they are Americans?" "Surely, Signorina. Who else would pay the great price for this estate for 3 years? The land pays nothing back, a few oranges, some grapes, when they are cared for, a handful of almonds and olives, and there is a servant besides myself, my niece Leona, who is handmaid and assists the young lady." "This sounds promising," said Mary Louise, turning to her grandfather. "Suppose we go up to the house. Are the people at home, Silvio? The Signora's student and his daughter?" The man reflected, leaning on his hoe. "I think they are both at the mansion, Signorina, although the student Americano may not yet have returned from Sorrento. The road to the mansion is beyond the hill, on the other side of the estate, so I am not sure the Signora student has returned. But you will find the Signorina Alora there, if you decide to venture on. But perhaps you are the friends of my employer and his daughter?" "What is his name?" asked Colonel Hathaway. "It is Jones. The American saying is Mr. Jason Jones, but here he is only called the Signora Student Americano." "Why?" asked Mary Louise. "Because his occupation is reading. He does nothing else. Always there is a book in his hand, and always he is thinking of the things he reads. He does not often speak, even to his daughter; he does not have friends who visit him. If you should call at the mansion, then you will be the first people who have done so for 3 years." There was something in this report, in the manner of the man as well as his words, that caused the strangers to hesitate. The description of the student led them to suspect he was a recluse, who might not welcome them cordially; but Mary Louise reflected that there was a daughter, and decided that any American girl shut up on this 3-acre estate for 3 years would be glad to meet another American girl. So she said abruptly, "Come on, Gran'pa Jim, let's call. It is possible that Americans will have something better in the larder than cakes and goat's milk." The hilltop was reached sooner than they expected, and in a little vale was the old mansion, a really attractive vine-clad villa that might have stood a century or more. It was not very big, but there were numerous outbuildings which rendered the size of the house proper unimportant. As Mary Louise and her grandfather drew nearer they discovered a charming flower garden, carefully tended, and were not surprised to find a young girl bending over a rose bush. End of Chapter 7. Read by Sabella Denton. For more free audiobooks or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Mary Louise Solves a Mystery by L. Frank Baum. Read for LibriVox.org into the public domain. Mary Louise Meets Laura. The two stood motionless a moment, looking at the girl, and Mary Louise marked the graceful figure and attractive features with real delight. The Signorina Alora, as the man had called her, was nearly her own age, 15, Mary Louise judged her to be, and her golden hair and fair complexion proclaimed her an American. But now the girl's quick ears had detected a presence, and she looked up with a startled expression, half fearful and half shy, and turned as if to fly. But in the next moment she had collected herself and advanced with hesitating steps to meet them. "Pardon our intrusion," said Colonel Hathaway, raising his hat. "Our carriage broke down on the Amalfi Road, a little while ago, and our driver has gone to Positano for a new wheel. Meantime we were exploring our surroundings and stumbled upon the path leading to this spot. Forgive the trespass, if you will, and allow me to present my granddaughter, Mary Louise Burrows. I am Colonel James Hathaway of New York, although we usually reside at a little town called Dorfield." The girl's bow was stiff and awkward. She blushed in an embarrassed way as she replied, "I am Alora Jones, sir, and I am living here for a time now with my father, Jason Jones. We also are Americans, at least we used to be." "Then doubtless you are yet," responded the colonel with a smile. "May we pay our respects to your father?" He is not home yet," she answered, more embarrassed than before. "He went to Sorrento for some books this morning and has not yet returned. But perhaps he will be back soon," she added, seeming to ponder the matter. "Will you not come in and have some refreshment? In my father's absence I am glad to welcome you." She glanced shyly at Mary Louise as if to implore her to forgive any seeming lack of hospitality and accept her coldly worded invitation. No one could look at Mary Louise without gaining confidence, and the friendly smile and warm handclasp made Alora feel instantly that here was a girl who could prove congenial under any circumstances. Really, it would not take them long to become friends, and poor Alora had no girl friends whatever. She led them into a cool and comfortable living room and called to Leona to fetch tea and biscuits. "We are entirely shut in here," she explained. "It seems to me worse than a convent, for there I would see other girls while here I see no one but the servants and my father," as an afterthought, year in and year out." "It's a pretty place," declared Mary Louise cheerfully. "But it's an awfully dreary place, too, and sometimes I feel that I'd like to run away, if I knew where to go," said Alora frankly. "You have lived here 3 years?" asked Colonel Hathaway. "Yes. We left New York more than 4 years ago and traveled a year in different places, always stopping at the little towns, where there is not much to interest one. Then my father found this place and rented it, and here we've stayed I can't say lived ever since. I get along pretty well in the daytime, with my flowers and the chickens to tend, but the evenings are horribly lonely. Sometimes I feel that I shall go mad." Mary Louise marked her wild look and excited manner, and her heart went out in sympathy to the lonely girl. Colonel Hathaway, too, intuitively recognized Alora's plaint as a human cry for help, and did not need to guess the explanation. The man in the vineyard had called her father the student, and said he was a reserved man and never was seen without a book in his hand. This would mean that he was not companionable, and Alora's protest plainly indicated that her father devoted small time, if any, to the cultivation of his daughter's society. "I suppose," remarked the old gentleman, "that Mr. Jones is so immersed in his studies that he forgets his daughter lacks society and amusement." Mary Louise caught the slight, scornful smile that for a moment curled Alora's lips. But the girl replied, very seriously: "My father dislikes society. I believe he would be quite content to live in this little cooped-up place forever, and see no one but the servants, to whom he seldom speaks. Also, he ignores me, and I'm glad he does. But before my mother died," her voice breaking a little, "I was greatly loved and petted, and I can't get used to the change. I ought not to say this to strangers, I know, but I am very lonely and unhappy, because my father is so different from what my mother was." Mary Louise was holding her trembling hand now and stroking it sympathetically. "Tell us about your mother," she said softly. "Is it long since you lost her?" "More than 4 years," returned Alora. "I was her constant companion and she taught me to love art and music and such things, for art was her hobby. I did not know my father in those days, you see, for they did not live together. But in her last illness Mamma sent for him and made him my guardian. My mother said that my father would love me, but she must have misjudged him." Colonel Hathaway had listened with interest. "Tell me your mother's name," said he. "She was Mrs. Antoinette Seaver Jones, and—" "Indeed!" exclaimed the Colonel. "Why, I knew Antoinette Seaver before she married, and a more beautiful and cultured woman I never met. Her father, Captain Seaver, was my friend, and I met his daughter several times, both at his mining camp and in the city. So you see, my dear, we must be friends." Alora's eyes fairly glistened with delight, and Mary Louise was as pleased as she was surprised. "Of course we're friends!" she cried, pressing the girl's hand. "And isn't it queer we have come together in this singular manner, in a foreign country, and just because our carriage wheel happened to break?" "I thought your mother married an artist," said Mary Louise's grandfather, reflectively. "She did. At least, she thought Jason Jones was an artist," answered Alora, with bitter emphasis. "But he was, in fact, a mere dauber. He became discouraged in his attempts to paint, and soon after he took me to New York he destroyed all his work. Really, it was dreadful, and since then he has never touched a brush." "That is strange," mused the Colonel. "I once saw a landscape by Jason Jones that was considered a fine conception, skillfully executed. That was the opinion of so good a judge as Captain Seaver himself. Therefore, for some reason the man's genius must have forsaken him." "I think that is true," agreed Alora, "for my mother's estimate of art was undoubtedly correct. I have read somewhere that discouragement sometimes destroys one's talent, though in after years, with proper impulse, it may return with added strength. In my father's case," she explained, "he was not able to sell his work, and no wonder. So now he does nothing at all but read, and even that doesn't seem to amuse him much." The Colonel had now remembered that Antoinette Seaver Jones was a woman of great wealth, and therefore her daughter must be an heiress. What a shame to keep the girl hidden in this out-of-the-way place, when she should be preparing to assume an important position in the world. "May I ask your age, my dear?" he said. "I am 15, sir," replied Alora. "And your father is the guardian of your fortune?" "Yes, by my mother's wish." "I suppose you are receiving proper instruction?" "None at all, sir. Since I've been in my father's care I've had no instruction whatever. That isn't right, is it?" "What isn't right?" demanded a gruff voice, and all three turned to find Jason Jones standing in the doorway. End of Chapter 8. Read by Sabella Denton. For more free audiobooks or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 9 of Mary Louise Solves a Mystery by L. Frank Baum. Read for LibriVox.org into the public domain. Mary Louise Sends a Mystery. Colonel Hathaway instantly rose. "I beg your pardon," said he. "I'm Colonel James Hathaway, an American, and this is my granddaughter, Mary Louise Burrows. Our carriage met with an accident on the main road below, and we wandered in here while waiting for repairs and chanced to meet your daughter. You're Mr. Jones, I believe." He nodded, still standing in his place and regarding his visitors with unconcealed suspicion. Under his arm he held several books. "Who informed you that I was living here?" he demanded. "I was wholly unaware of the fact," said the colonel, stiffly. "I did not know you were in Italy. I did not know such an important person existed, strange to say, although I can remember that an artist named Jason Jones once married Antoinette Seaver, the daughter of my old friend, Captain Robert Seaver." "Oh, you remember that, do you?" "This is the first time I have had the distinguished honor of meeting you, sir, and I trust it will be the last time." "That's all right," said Jason Jones more cordially. "I can't see that it's any of my affair either way." "We have been making the acquaintance of Tony Seaver's daughter, Miss Alora Jones, in your absence, but we will not intrude any further, Mr. Jones. Come, Mary Louise." "Oh, don't go," pleaded Alora, catching Mary Louise's arm. And just then Leona entered with the tea and biscuits. "Sit down, man," said Jason Jones in a less aggressive tone. "I've no objection to your coming here, under the circumstances, and you are our first visitors in 3 years. That's often enough, but now that you are here, make yourself at home. What's happening over in America? Have you been there lately?" He laid his books on a table and sat down. But after that one speech, which he perhaps considered conciliatory, he remained glum and allowed the others to do the talking. Colonel Hathaway had stayed because he noted the longing look in Mary Louise's eyes. He was himself interested in Alora and indignant over her evident neglect. For her sake he would bear the insolence of his host, and insolence he recognized as characteristic of the man. Alora, in her father's presence, lost her fluent speech and no longer dared mention personal matters to her guests. Both Mary Louise and her grandfather tried to lead Alora and Jason Jones to speak of themselves, of their life and future plans, but the man evaded direct answers, and the girl had suddenly become silent and reserved. Finally, however, Mary Louise had an idea. "We are bound for Sorrento," said she, "where we intend to stay a week at the Hotel Vittoria. Will you let Alora come to us for over Sunday, as our guest? We will drive here and get her the day after tomorrow, that's Saturday, you know, and fetch her home on Monday." "No," said Jason Jones. "Oh, why not, father?" pleaded the girl. "You've no fit clothes. I don't want you hanging around Sorrento," he replied. "It will be a nice change for your daughter, and it will give us much pleasure to entertain her," said Mary Louise. "It's a capital idea," declared the colonel, positively, and looking the other man straight in the eye, he added, "I am sure you will withdraw your objections, Mr. Jones." The man dropped his eyes, frowning. But presently he said to Alora, "Go if you want to, but keep out of the town. Don't leave the hotel grounds." "Why not?" asked his daughter in a defiant tone. "It's not safe. I know Sorrento, and these rascally Italians would be glad to steal you if they had the chance, and then blackmail me a ransom." Mary Louise laughed. "What a fine adventure that would be!" she exclaimed. "But we will promise to guard Alora and keep her from the clutches of bandits. I didn't know there were any left in Italy." "To get rid of them you'd have to depopulate the country," said Jason Jones. "It's no laughing matter, young woman, and my daughter is somewhat valuable." End of Chapter 9. Read by Sibylla Denton. For more free audiobooks or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Of Mary Louise Solves a Mystery by L. Frank Baum. Read for LibriVox.org into the public domain. Mere speculation. The driver returned with the wheel. It fitted the axle, but was some 2 or 3 inches larger in diameter than the other rear wheel, and, moreover, it was flat on one side, so that when they started to conclude their journey the motion of the carriage was something startling. A rock-a-bye baby ride, Mary Louise called it. But the wheels turned and their carriage progressed, and when they were well on their way the girl said, "What do you think of that man, Grandpa Jim?" "Do you mean Alora's father, Jason Jones?" "Yes, of course." "I am surprised at 2 things," said the old colonel. "First, it is curious that Tony Seaver, a rarely cultured woman, should have married such a man, and again it is amazing that she should have confided her daughter and her fortune to his care." "Do you know," observed Mary Louise, sliding closer to him and dropping her voice, although there was absolutely no chance of being overheard, "I scent a mystery in that family, Grandpa Jim." "That seems to be one of your regular diversions, to scent mysteries," he replied. "And usually, my dear, the suspicion is unwarranted. The most commonplace people frequently impress you with the idea that they are other than what they seem, are leading double lives, or are endeavouring to conceal some irregularity of conduct. You've a faculty of reading the natures and characteristics of strangers by studying their eyes, their facial expressions, and their oddities of demeanour, which is interesting psychologically, but too often—" "You are unjust, Grandpa," declared Mary Louise indignantly. "Didn't you yourself say there are two curious and surprising things about this man Jones?" "Not exactly. I said it was curious and astonishing that Antoinette Seaver should have trusted so fully a man who impresses me as a churl. His own child, little Alora, appears to dislike and even to despise him, and—" "There!" cried Mary Louise. "I'm vindicated. Your observations fully justify my remark that there's a mystery in that family. Did you notice the books he brought home and laid upon the table?" "No," said Colonel Hathaway, rather bewildered. "They were novels by Marie Corelli, H. G. Wells and O. Henry. A student? Then a student of modern novels, a man who reads and reads to keep his mind from dwelling on past history. He is a disappointed artist, to begin with." "That is certainly odd," rejoined the old gentleman, reflectively. "The one picture I ever saw by Jason Jones was certainly good. I remember that once when I was lunching with Bob Seaver—that was Antoinette's father, you know—he told me his daughter was interested in a young artist of exceptional talent, and he took me to a gallery to show me what this man could do. I am not an art critic, as you are aware, my dear, but this landscape of Jason Jones appealed to me as delightful. Captain Bob knew art, and so did Antoinette, so it is evident that Jones could paint, but for some reason became dissatisfied with his work and abandoned it. Perhaps his ambition was too lofty for human skill to realize, yet nothing less would content him." Mary Louise sat silent for a while. Then she asked: "Did Jason Jones impress you as a man capable of a great ambition? Would you guess him an artist who had once accomplished admirable things?" "Artists are always peculiar," stated her grandfather. "They must be temperamental in order to be artists, and temperaments differ widely. Had I not known something of Jason Jones's history I might have felt, on making his acquaintance today, that he is not an ordinary man. For gruff and churlish though he proved, it is undeniable that he has selected a charming and retired spot in which to live—" "Or to hide," she interrupted. "Or that, with considerable wealth at his command, he lives simply and unostentatiously, enjoying nature's choice gifts and content with the simple life he leads, with only the society of his young daughter." "Whom he neglects and refuses to educate properly," declared the girl. "What makes you think he is wealthy?" "I know that Antoinette made millions, after her father died, from the mines. By current reports she retired and invested her money wisely, in sound securities, which accord her with excellent business reputation. Her daughter not being of age—let me see, she must have been but 11 when her mother passed away. There would be a guardian appointed for the heiress, and Alora told us that it was her mother's wish that her father act as her guardian. So the conclusion is evident, that Mr. Jones has a large income at his command." "All the more reason he should be generous, but he isn't spending much of it," said Mary Louise. "No, he is probably living simply in order that his daughter's fortune may increase during the years of her minority. That is a point in his favour, you must admit." "Nevertheless," asserted the young girl, "I think there is something wrong in the Jones family. It isn't due to Alora. She's a dear little thing, wild and untamed but very lovable, I'm sure, so the fault must lie with her boorish father. Allowing that once he was a big man, something has mysteriously soured him, and rendered his life hateful, not only to himself but to all around him." "Look, Mary Louise, we're getting into Sorrento," said the Colonel. "Here the road leaves the sea and crosses the plateau to the town. You'll like Sorrento, I'm sure, for it is one of the quaintest places in old Italy, and the hotel is really comfortable." End of Chapter 10. Read by Sibella Denton. For more free audiobooks or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.